If you guys are here to learn about the Drupal fork, you're in the right place. We're here to talk to you about Backdrop CMS and a little bit why it came to be. Backdrop CMS is a tool specifically created to help people make websites. It is also has a stated target audience for being businesses, nonprofits, and educations. So these are usually the kinds of organizations that have rather complex requirements, but usually don't have very large budgets to work within. Does everyone here know what a fork is? In open source software, this is pretty common, where you take something and you steal it. But because it's open source, it's not stealing. It's just that's how it works. And with Backdrop, we took Drupal and we changed its name to Backdrop and we re-released it. We also made a whole bunch of other changes along the way that we thought were more in line with our goals were, specifically for tools that make people build websites and for that intended audience of people who need really complex solutions for not complex budgets. I think in the world of web development, things have changed a lot recently. There's a lot of really good tools available out there. And when I first started building Drupal sites, I had friends that would come to me and say, I need a website. And I'd be like, I can make you a Drupal site. And today, if my friends come to me and say, I need a website, I say, have you heard of Squarespace? Because most of the time, most people do not need a Drupal site. It does a lot more than the average site does. There's also a really popular tool you've probably all heard of called WordPress that powers about 30% of the internet. And it's a really great tool for doing those smaller brochureware sites, also blog engines. Anything a little bit more complicated can be solved by adding a rich library of plugins, and I think that meets the needs of a lot of people out there too. Drupal has moved into the enterprise market, so they're now solving the needs for the very high end of the spectrum, and that opens a little bit of a gap between the kinds of people who are going to be best suited for WordPress and the kinds of people who are best suited for Drupal, and Backdrop sort of fits inside that gap. So we've taken Drupal 7 and made it more accessible and appealing to the WordPress audience by improving the user experience, making it faster, making it more intuitive. And we've also tried to include some of the features that have gone into Drupal 8 to make sure that anyone who felt limited by what their Drupal 7 sites can do can still have the additional features that they would expect from their CMS. Nate and I are the co-founders of Backdrop CMS. I am the project lead, which means that I am mostly in charge of people and run meetings. And Nate is the technical lead, and that means he's mostly in charge of code and gets to have the final say on what is and isn't allowed in the code base.
All right, here we go. I'll say something here. So we've been in the Drupal community for a long time. We've done a lot of major websites, some of which you may have heard of. Jen did worked on Habitat for Humanity with Chapter 3. And Oxfam also with Chapter 3, and Bay Area Rapid Transit as her independent generation agency. I've done work with the Grammys, Harvard, Tesla Motors, and a lot of other big names. I did a lot of work for Sony Music. At one point, like Beyonce's website was running on the platform that we made on Drupal, which was very exciting, as well as like dozens and dozens of other major artists. So it's been really exciting. Taking Drupal from the very young days of Drupal, 4.7 and then 4.6, and really plunging it into the enterprise space. Like Lullabot was one of the first companies really pushing Drupal into the media space. Like it's the reason why like a lot of major conglomerates today use Drupal still, because we had that really early push in Drupal into that space like 12 years ago.
So Nate and I have a lot of experience making websites in the Drupal world, from every range, from the little guys, who's what I work on now, to the big guys, and sort of the different kinds of needs each one of those audience has.
We also have a long history in doing training. Together, combined, we've taught over 1,500 students, featured in online training videos, and before that, DVD videos on how to learn Drupal. We worked together and separately on creating materials for in-person training. I was a trainer for Lullabot when we were doing the only in-person trainings in the country, and we would fly all over the place, and people would actually fly to locations just to take our trainings because they were the only ones available pretty much in existence for Drupal at the time. And I also wrote the first O'Reilly book that covered Drupal, or helped or co-authored it along with the other Lullabots at the time using Drupal. And Jen was the director of training at Chapter 3 from 2010 through 2012.
And part of the reason this is important is because Nate and I have a lot of experience in teaching people who haven't seen Drupal how to use Drupal. So their first experiences with the platform is something that really seasoned developers forget because we're so familiar with all the ins and outs of it and all the peculiarities. You show it to someone new and you're like, oh, I guess that is weird. I don't know why it does that. Maybe we can fix that. In terms of writing the training materials, there's also a lot of stuff for when you have to explain why something does it a certain way. You realize it shouldn't do it that way. Some of the materials people are still taking in classes today. There's a class called Drupal in a Day. I originally wrote that class like 5 years ago for the company I was working for at the time. It then got distributed to Acquia, and they gave it to all of their training partners. So it's something that like we know what we're doing, or at least did 5 years ago. And we're also trying to teach people how to use this software, and hopefully that'll translate into trying to make the software better for those people.
Also in the world of core development, we've been active for quite a while. I wrote the original Ajax framework and AHA framework in Drupal 6. I'm still an image and file module maintainer for Drupal 7. And I wrote a large part of the dialogue system and was the primary proponent for CK Editor in Drupal 8.
I was much newer to core development. I didn't really get into it until after Drupal 7 came out, and I was really angry. And then I was like, why is everything broken? And then I realized that I had the power to fix it if I wanted to. And I was like, this is amazing. This is how open source works. And I sort of plunged in. I got on the usability team. I started doing usability studies. I was really focused on cleaning up the user interface. I found like weird little bugs everywhere that nobody noticed because my students in training tried things that none of the normal Drupal audience tried. And I was able to get those fixed. And I really loved that experience of getting the instant gratification of like something someone finds in my class. I create an issue, and by the end of the week I can be like, this is how open source works. You helped fix Drupal, which was fantastic. And then in Drupal 8, still because of my training, I felt like the theme system was too hard to teach people. And so I wanted to help solve that. And so I ended up offering to run a couple of meetings at the very beginning of the idea of putting Twig in core, and then I somehow accidentally became the initiative lead for that. And I did that for 2 years, again, doing things like running meetings and managing issue queues and helping kind of direct the direction of that change. So Nate and I have a lot of experience working with core developers, looking at how decisions are made, how changes are made, and how projects end up changing directions sometimes. So Nate and I also are big fans of the Drupal community. Together we have spoken at more than 155 Drupal events. That includes North America, Europe, Latin America, anywhere, Australia, anywhere there's an exciting Drupal event we like to go. And part of that is because I feel like what makes Drupal so amazing is not just the software, but it's the community of people that use it. How everybody has a different life experience, brings them different experience in using the software, different perspective, and new ideas on how we should improve things. I organized DrupalCon San Francisco in 2010. It was the last DrupalCon that was organized entirely by a local community. And I've also been an organizer of Bay Area Drupal Camp since 2007. That's only notable because long before I ever wrote a line of code for the Drupal community, I was running a registration desk at a camp. So I feel like the community itself is more important than the software beneath it.
So all of this is to say, there's a lot of background, way more than your usual talk, we realize. And we really just wanted to provide all that history and background to really emphasize that Backdrop was made by people who love Drupal, not because like we're trying to attack Drupal or get back at Drupal or anything. We really love the system, and we love the community. We've built much of our adult lives, our relationships, our friends, our professional careers, all upon the foundation of Drupal. And so Drupal is a system and a community that we've loved for a long time, and by creating Backdrop, what we're hoping to do is make it so that a lot of people who are in the Drupal community have the opportunity to stay within that same sphere of the software that they know and the community that they know.
And the software that they love.
Yeah, by continuing the software as it was prior to like the radical transformation or the rewrite of Drupal 8. So
Nate and I aren't in this alone. When we first decided to create Backdrop, we were trying to figure out how to create a governance model that we thought would make more sense for our project. And Nate did a ton of research on all of the different ways open source projects can be managed, and we decided to create a project management committee.
Yeah, the project management committee model is one used by the Apache project and the Apache Foundation. The Apache project, or the Apache Foundation, covers a lot more things than just the web server. The web server is what everybody knows, but Apache covers dozens of different software projects, including OpenOffice, Solr, and Lucene, lots of different projects all underneath this umbrella of the Apache Foundation. And both the individual projects and the foundation itself are run under this project management committee model, which is essentially a board, if you will, that decisions are made by voting, and then majority wins, and then the board can vote and bring in and out different members by voting them in. So a slightly more democratic and distributed version, making it so that all decisions are made across, well, at least more than one person.
Yeah, so this is really different from the models that you might be familiar with in Drupal and WordPress, where there's a BDFL, or a benevolent dictator for life, where we felt like we didn't want that responsibility. We also wanted the project to be able to continue if we were hit by a bus. So we wanted to set up a leadership model that would make it so that people could step in and out based on their time and availability, whether they wanted to do this anymore or not, and the project would be able to carry on with different leadership at any time. So on the leadership committee, project management committee right now, Nate and I are on it. We have Mike McCaffrey, who Nate, as you know, is a core committer and very focused on user experience. Mike does a lot of contributed module development, so he's looking at the back end and the APIs. Wes Rubocabla, who's here, he did a CSS training yesterday, who's very focused on the front end to make sure that stuff we're putting in is good for front end developers. Jack Aponte, who runs a business in San Francisco, is there to make sure that the product we build can still be sold. So making sure that the developers aren't doing things that developers love, but that doesn't make any sense in the business world. And then we have Gregory Nessus, who's in Australia, and he considers himself a non-coder, and he wants to make sure that he has all of the tools he has to build a website without having to get into code on the back end. And all of these people right now are representing different constituents of our community, and that includes what they're doing with the software, but we're also trying to make sure that our project management committee represents different constituents in terms of race and gender, geographic location, languages spoken, so that if we do get a whole bunch of people who are adopting Backdrop in Latin America or Russia, we're going to make sure that there's a representation from their community on the decision-making board for the project as well.
So the project management committee, they're responsible for several different aspects of the project, handling conflict resolution. We have a description of how that actually works on the, I think we have a whole conflict resolution page on backdropcms.org about like if there's some conflict within the community, whether it's technical or personal, then issues right now are escalated to the project management committee for them to basically have a secondary private discussion and then make a decision as a group. Setting the overall direction of the project and ensuring each change follows the project's philosophy. So setting the overall direction and having a project philosophy, these things are in place to kind of keep the project on track, because I think that all projects have a tendency to tend towards complexity over time, feature bloat, and eventually the thing that was like the super lean, easy, fast thing becomes the blow, slow, complicated thing, and so I think that that's a cycle that just kind of keeps repeating itself unless there's something that keeps it locked into a particular mentality. And so the having a direction and philosophy helps ensure that.
A publicly stated one.
A publicly stated one. But if something happens that the project perhaps is shifting and the PMC sees that, well, maybe like
the web is shifting.
The web is, yeah.
People are accessing the websites from their refrigerators now instead of just their mobile phones, and we need to do a refrigerator first design. We would need to publicly state that in our philosophy before we could include those changes in core, so that everybody in the community would know what was happening to the project before it happened.
Yeah, it makes changes explicit instead of just being implicit. So I mean,
So the PMCs, everybody comes from their own experiences, their own life expectancies, and they're supposed to be making decisions for the project. But rather than making the decisions that's best for them, they need to be looking at every question with what's best for the project. So they look at the list of principles and say, I think that the answer to this question relates to principle number 2, and they need to explain why. They don't need to say, I want it to do X. And I think that's really helpful in helping the community decide what decisions are right for the whole project. I think I just said all of these things. Oh.
Oh no.
No, Linux. I touched something and it exploded.
No. It's, oh dear.
What did I do?
I don't even know.
I think I touched your trackpad. Can you hit back in your browser? Because it has a number on the side.
Oh, that would have worked. Okay, it's fine. Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay, so we missed the big reveal there. Anyway, so in order for the PMC model, the entire thing to work, you have to define the philosophy. Unlike the BDFL model, where it's like, well, what does this person think? Like, let's take this to that one person and get their opinion on it. That person doesn't ever have to, it's not required that they express their opinion or document their opinion long term. It's all just kind of like, well, a lot of people are like, well, I think that person would like this, and so I'm going to implement it according to how I think that they would want it. Or they get a chance to be like, I'm going to go talk to that person and tell them my perspective, and then they'll understand my perspective, and then someone else will go and talk to them and tell them their perspective, and they say, what's your decision? And it isn't based on anything that's like publicly stated ahead of time. It's about that person weighing all options and deciding what they think is best. So with this model, because we don't want people's personal opinions, we want them to be thinking what are the goals of the project and working off of that. So in order for that to work, you need to define the goals. So we've written down the principles of Backdrop CMS. You can find it backdropcms.org/philosophy, and we're going to run over them.
So the first one is making easier updates, and this obviously came from our experience previous versions of Drupal, 6 to 7, 7 to 8. Everyone seems to be getting harder than the one before. So at the very beginning of Backdrop, we said this is too much. We thought it was too much. I personally thought it was way too much in Drupal 7. My clients, who were the little ones, had a really hard time forking out the money for that upgrade when they felt they weren't getting anything for it. So looking at what they would be facing ahead for Drupal 8, I was like, no, this isn't going to work. So trying to make updates easier means we have to include more of what was there before in what's there in the future. So making sure that backwards compatibility is in there will help with that. The next one is simplicity. So this is making sure that the majority of people who look at the code will be able to understand it. So that means rather than adopting the latest and greatest design patterns or what some people might think is best, we're going to try and appeal to the lowest common denominator and involve the most number of people. I personally believe that it doesn't really matter what experience you have in terms of programming. The more eyes you get on the code, the more likely you're going to find problems with it, and the more likely you're going to come up with solutions. So we want every file, you can open it, read it from top to bottom, and get a general understanding of what's going on. And that means you need to have code that most people can understand without needing to go to a special school for it. Focus is also really important. We want to make sure that everything that is in Backdrop Core is something that is going to be used by maybe 80% of sites that are running the software. That'll help us keep it lean. So over time, if we look at all the modules that are in there and you go, oh, this one, no one's using this one, that one's going to go to contrib so that core developers aren't burdened with maintaining something that no one's using. We also want to keep it extensible because obviously someone's going to need that feature, and so that's going to need to leverage the APIs in order to do it. So making sure that we still have the ability to add modules and themes and in Backdrop layouts in the same way we did in Drupal is what's going to make it as powerful a tool as Drupal was. So because we're coming from that world, we know we need that, we're focused on making it stay as flexible. Security is also really important to us. This is also something we're hoping to set us a little bit apart from WordPress, where we're going to focus security first, always. And we really want to make sure that we keep both the sites that are running Backdrop and the people that are using them as safe as we can. And performance. This was another pain point in Drupal 7. A lot of people were struggling with their Drupal 7 sites getting really slow, especially after they've been running for a long time with a lot of modules, a lot of content. And so we have a desire to make Backdrop run faster. In particular, we want to make sure it can run on shared hosting so that you don't have to have specialized hosting for your specialized CMS. And also we want to release on time. This also came from Nate and my experience in the Drupal world, where when you ask when is it coming out and the answer is when it's ready, that was really frustrating for us. We thought it would be much better for businesses and developers to be able to say, there's a release on this day and this month, and they'd say, okay, we can budget money for that month. Developers can budget time for that week. Just makes it much easier to manage. And so that means that if we have a feature that's planned for Backdrop 114 and it doesn't get in, we still are going to release 114 on that day, because everything that's in core is always going to be shippable at any time, and that feature will just be bumped to the next release. Freedom. We love freedom. Obviously, we're here because we had the freedom to fork the software. We want to keep that so that Backdrop can also be forked, which has happened, which is great. But we did, of course, inherit the freedom from Drupal's license, so we don't actually have any choice in retaining our freedom, but that's okay because we like it anyway.
So we take all of these principles, we distill them all down to the mission statement of Backdrop itself. And here it is. We're going to read through it, and then we're actually going to go through the words in it. So Backdrop CMS enables people to build highly customized websites affordably through collaboration and open source software. And I'll let Jen take the first word because it's her favorite one.
Well, not Backdrop, but the first word I want to emphasize, Backdrop is my favorite word. No, I really like that we chose to use the word people. Backdrop is for people. It's not for developers. It's not a framework. It is a platform that is made for the most people possible to benefit from it. So that includes developers, but it also includes people who aren't developers. So Backdrop's for people.
Highly customized is also really key. That the reason why people choose Drupal is because they actually need highly customized things. They need relational data. They need it all to be separated out so that they can aggregate and slice and dice content in different ways.
Access control,
permissions, all of these things that make Drupal. We really want to keep those parts, and that enables the highly customized part of it. And so highly customized is really important to us, and it's what separates us from the WordPress. Yeah. Websites, though, this is interesting. This is one of the things that almost separates us from Drupal. In that
Backdrop is for websites.
and that Drupal has been branching out from just dealing with websites to saying, oh, well, we want Drupal to be your content store. We want Drupal to be your system that powers the APIs, that powers your apps, that is decoupled for your Hydra-based website or whatever. Backdrop, we really are focused on the website. That is our primary thing. We're for people that really want to do their website, and if you want to build other stuff on top of it,
that's fine.
That's fine,
you can do that.
But that's not our mission. Our mission is the website.
So that stuff is going to happen in Contrib, where we're going to be focused on websites in core.
Yeah. Affordably is also another really big key word here that, like any software, you should only be using it if it saves you time and money. And so making Backdrop affordable is the question that we ask everything. Like, is this going to make things easier? Is this going to save people time? Because as we save people time and money, then that makes the system more desirable. And lastly, collaboration and open source software. That we do all of this in the open as openly as we can, because we believe that we are stronger together doing it in the open. And doing it with as many people from as many different backgrounds as possible. So let's look at this affordable word and ask the question, like, how do we make web development more affordable?
So the first thing you can do is increase the number of things the website does out of the box. So if you were going to build a brand new website today on Drupal 7, which is, we know, 10 years old, the instruction would be step 1, install Drupal. Step 2, install these 20 modules. So what we've done in Backdrop is taken those 20 modules and integrated them into the software so that hopefully we can skip steps 2 and get to step 3, which is build your website. And the more you can do out of the box without needing to look outside the original software, the faster you're going to get from start to finish. The next is to improve the user experience. So while you're in the software building your website, you want to be as fast as possible going from one interface to another. Don't frustrate people. Make it really clear. Make intuition correct. Make it easy to do things, and that is going to make people happier using the tool as well. Improving developer experience. So, okay, you got the front end done. You want to do something custom on the back end. We've got to make that experience the same. It also has to be intuitive. It has to be fast. It has to be easy and simple. So that's going to help make things faster too. decreasing server and resource usage. This is about your hosting. So Drupal 7 already got to a point where it was kind of hitting the edges of what a lot of hosting providers would do by default, and people had to increase their hosting size. We want to make sure Backdrop is less resource
intensive.
There you go. Than Drupal 7 was. It's got to be faster and run on leaner machines. Making updates take less effort. So this is also something we see. There were a whole bunch of security updates in Drupal over the past few years, and we want to do a better job of keeping our users safer. So we've got to make that process of staying up to date easier. We've already got a button in Backdrop that lets you hit it and it'll update itself. We want to make sure we have the ability to turn that on and make it happen automatically too, so that people can stay safe without needing to worry about it in the future. And making upgrades faster and easier. Obviously, upgrades right now have been a big pain point in the history of Drupal. We've worked Drupal, we've worked that pain. We're trying to make it much easier. So right now, the upgrade path from Drupal 7 to Backdrop is easier than the upgrade from Drupal 5 to Drupal 6. And that should be the hardest upgrade we have to do yet. So we're also going to continue to improve the current upgrade from Drupal 7 to Backdrop between now and Drupal 7's end of life. So hopefully it will get even easier than it is today. And hopefully going forward, we'll get all of our changes in place in a way with backwards compatibility that it'll get easier and easier to make every major version upgrade. And more. Obviously, we know Drupal is expensive, and Drupal 7 is expensive. And so as we solve all of these issues, we'll then ask the question again, what is the thing that's making running your Backdrop site expensive, and how do we solve that? And we'll continue to fight for that going forward, because it's in our mission statement.
So releases, we have 3 releases a year, once every 4 months, January 15th, May 15th, and September 15th. We usually have code freeze on the first of that month and then have a 2-week period to wrap things up. Since Backdrop is shippable at any time, it really could be released on any day that we chose, just make a release right now. But this way people have a good idea of when they should be allocating time to take a look at, let's see that our site is ready to be updated, we can try out the new version, check for any bugs, and then they can prepare for that time.
It's also helpful for core developers to be like, oh, I can take a breath, and then I can start working later because I know I have 3 months until the next release, so I can have some time off, which really helps with burnout too.
Yeah, our release cycle, if you actually look at our code graphs on GitHub, it's kind of obvious that this has an impact. It's also nice that having deadlines 3 times a year makes it so that work gets done that much faster, because the deadlines work. They really make stuff happen.
They do, and it's also not completely deflating to have the issue you've been working on not make this release, because the next one's only 4 months away. So it also seems like it doesn't hurt so much when you don't make a deadline, because there's another one. Yeah,
we've had a lot of people say that contributing to Backdrop is a very rewarding experience, because stuff happens. There's movement. You post an issue, the friction is low, it's on GitHub, so integration is familiar, and things happen. It's great.
Get done. We've had 14 on-time releases since we first released Backdrop, which was January 15th, 2015. Our birthday, January 15th, also happens to be Drupal's birthday. We didn't plan it that way. We wanted to release it on January 1st, but one of our very smart marketing people said, that's a terrible idea. Nobody's going to be paying attention to anything on January 1st, so we bumped it to the 15th. And then surprise, later, now the 2 software projects have the same birthday.
Yes. So we have birthdays on the same time, and so
we can have birthday parties.
Yeah, we coordinate these birthday parties, and it's Backdrop birthday party or Drupal birthday party, and it's one or the other, and there's usually one person from the opposite party.
That's okay. We're all friends, right?
Yeah, it's been pretty funny, watching that happen on Twitter every year.
So our next release is September 15th. If you're curious about what's going to be in it, we have a milestone on GitHub that you can check, and we have a roadmap on the Backdrop.cms.org website, so you can go there and see everything that we've done in every past release, as well as the stuff we have planned for the future.
Something that's not, before we move on from release cycle, something that we haven't covered before that is a topic of note, is that Backdrop came out a year and a half before Drupal 8 was released, which was pretty interesting, that we forked in the middle of the Drupal 8 cycle, or early Drupal 8 cycle, and then got our config management and layout systems. Those are the 2 key features in the first version, and pushed out Backdrop 1.0 well before Drupal 8 was released. The way things are going right now, it's looking like Backdrop 1 is going to probably last longer than Drupal 8. Well, not much other than Drupal 9. That's a bold statement. Well, anyway, it's like it's going to last longer. It's going to last longer than Drupal 8, and a lot of this is because we
add features all the time.
Well, as part of the way that we approach things, like we're in this alternative history where it's like Drupal 8 without Symfony in it, and so Symfony is the driving factor for the end of life of Drupal 8, causing the end of life of Drupal 7. And so we don't have that same issue, that we still maintained all of our own dependencies internally, and that made it so that we can last longer. So it's going to really like be one of those reinforcing things where like upgrades will be easier and less frequent because we just have that flexibility to make things last longer.
Plus, because we have the ability to add new features all the time, there isn't the urgency to have a new version where it's like, do we need to break the APIs? We can just add 10 more features and everyone will continue to get updates without the struggle. So It's been an interesting thing where we originally thought we would have major version updates more often, but we'd never had experience working in a world where we can put stuff in whenever we want, because we came from Drupal 7 land.
And a system that we use backwards compatibility.
Right. And so now it's like, oh, hey, this is great.
Yeah, so
this is forever.
We keep adding more things to the Backdrop 2 list, and then after a little while we're like, why wait?
We can do that now.
Yeah, we just figure out a new way of handling the backwards compatibility, and then it doesn't wait. So, I mean, we're on Backdrop 1.14, that's 15 releases. I mean, we're going to be seeing probably Backdrop 120, it just kind of keeps going. So that's great. Anyway.
What about security? So this used to be a really hot question right after all of the major security releases happened, so we wanted to answer them for you up front. A couple of different things. We work with the Drupal security team, so if there is an issue that affects both Drupal and Backdrop, we coordinate on the solution. Sometimes the Drupal community will write patches for a Backdrop that solve the problem, and sometimes we will help blindly test issues that they've come up with solutions for first before we release them to the world, just to make sure that we're sort of all solving these problems together. We're on the same issues. When the releases come out, we release them on the same day. So anyone who's running Drupal or Backdrop should get the same level of protection because we're doing it together. However, if there was an issue that only applies to Backdrop, which of course there is, we have a process for handling that too. We don't need the Drupal security team. For our core process, we have a private email address people can email in reports to. We have a private security queue where we can note the issues, work on them, collaborate either with the people who created them or our internal security team or both. We have a pull request process where we can test the solutions against all of our automated tests in private and make sure we've got everything working before we have to merge them into the public repository. And we release our security releases on Wednesdays too. So it could be that there's a security release for Drupal 8 and one for Backdrop that come out on the same day that are completely unrelated. But at least that means that if you're a developer and you've got time set aside for doing security updates on Wednesdays, it'll fit in with your current schedule, which is nice. We handle contributed code a little bit differently than the Drupal community does because we have forks of many Drupal modules. Our Backdrop security team watches all of the security releases for all of the contrib modules. And if you're a member of the Backdrop contrib group and maintaining a module that has a Drupal version and there's a security release for the Drupal version and you miss it, our security team will notify you and say, hey, did you know there was a release for your module today? And if you're like, oh no, I'm on a plane, which sometimes happens, it's like, don't worry, we'll do it for you. So we are a little bit more supportive in terms of our community, mostly because the way our code is managed, it isn't that every individual person has their own projects. In Backdrop, everybody contributes their code into one single group. And so our security team has access to that entire group and permission to create releases to add security fixes as needed to any of those projects. So if one of our members either is worried about creating a security release because they've never done it before, or they can't do it on their own, or they don't have time, we've got a support structure for them underneath. That also helps a little bit with our focus on our intended audience, being maybe they're not developers, maybe they're just people, and they're going to need help when something comes up. So we want to make sure we support them in that process.
Yeah, if I add an anecdote here, when a new contributor comes in to go through the contrib approval process, we have an agreement that says, you will work with the security team. Like, if you don't respond, like, the security team may take action to modify your project on your behalf. And if the project becomes abandoned, like, people have the authority to, like, remove you and add themselves as part of the abandoned project process. And it's been working really well, but we had amazingly someone that refused that. They were like, no, it's going to be mine. And it's like, well, no, it's really not. And they're like, well, then you can't have my code.
But it was funny because their code was already GPL because it was Drupal, so we're like, yes, we can.
Yeah, so it was funny because they ported the module, but then they refused.
Give it to us.
They refused to upload it anywhere because they were afraid that we were going to steal it, which was
it's already on Drupal.org.
Yeah, well, they finished the port.
Yeah.
But then we were like, sorry, like, if you're not going to accept this, then
you can't be part of our community.
Yeah, we're just going to
We like to share.
We're just going to go
sharing.
our separate ways, and he left in a huff. But then we had to report that same module again ourselves, and honestly, like, that was worth it. Like, I mean, we headed off a problem before it became one, just by making there be a process and a policy for, like, making sure that people are aware of what they're getting into, that they're getting into a shared responsibility, not something that they own.
Yeah.
Really fascinating.
It's also really interesting because our process when someone applies includes a code review, but it's not a code review in a technical sense. It's sort of a code review in an assisted sense. So someone comes in and they've ported a module, we'll be like, great job! Did you know that Backdrop does this thing differently? Here's some documentation you might want to consider. And they're like, oh, thanks. Where they thought they were going to get, like, yelled at for doing it wrong, but we're like, no, we're here to, like, we know things you might not know yet, you're new, we're just going to make sure. And they're like, what? This is what I don't understand. Okay, I guess. But yeah, so it's been kind of a different experience for a bunch of people who weren't expecting that sort of welcome. We're like, you're in, but here's some things we thought you might want to know. And they're like, oh, this is great. So yeah, it's been really interesting to have sort of a different GitHub world than what we were in before. So speaking of contributed code, Backdrop has modules and themes just like Drupal. It also has another level add-on called layouts. This is something that we added in Backdrop because we wanted the theme and the positioning of your content on the page to not be related, so you can change your theme without breaking your site. We have a lot of them, not as much as Drupal. But if you look at Drupal 7, because that's where most people are coming from, looking at the top 100 of the Drupal modules that are out there, most of those are ready for Backdrop. There's 9 that we don't have yet. And if you look at this chart, you can see by color where these modules are landing. So based on our principles of having the features for the majority in core, most of the ones on the left-hand side have blue marks next to them. That means that they're either in or slated for core. If there's a checkbox, that means that the module itself has been moved into core. If there's an X, that means that the module has been integrated for core, so you don't need the module anymore because this feature is already there. And if it has cogwheels, that means that we're working on integrating it into core right now. So it might be partially included, and we're working on adding more features, but we've got that underway. And then the green checkboxes mean they're in contrib. So again, checkbox means that we have it in contrib. Cogwheels means that it's underway, which usually means there's a repository in GitHub, but maybe not a stable release yet. And then the black X's is just a module that you maybe don't need for Backdrop anymore. So there's some that, like, you don't need libraries anymore, API anymore, but we have it anyway. Somebody maybe didn't know that. And so there's going to be some stuff like that. Like there's a module for, like, Superfish or something, where it's like we have a responsive drop-down touch-friendly module in core, but someone might want Superfish and they might port it as well. So it's not necessary, but we might still get one. The ones with the red X's, there's a couple over here that we are expecting not to get. So field collection is a big one. We have both paragraphs and multi-field, and so we're hoping to include an upgrade path from field collection in Drupal 7 to paragraphs in Backdrop, and then maybe we won't need field collection at all. As soon as we get that upgrade path complete, that red X will turn into a black one that says don't need that anymore for Backdrop. There's some other ones we're hoping we won't get, like views PHP is a security issue. We probably will get that one, but we don't have it right now, or we're not really chomping on the bit to make it happen sooner. But in terms of, like, what the Drupal community needs, we're mostly there. We've got it mostly covered in terms of highest priorities. If we look at modules that aren't necessarily the top 100, and look at what has ended up in Backdrop Core, there's 62 contributed modules right now that you don't need to install on your Backdrop site because we either have put the module directly into core, something like a field module, email, link, date. Module has been integrated directly into parts of the core system, like path auto and token, or we've provided comparable alternatives. So something like panels, we have a layout module, which is a port of the panels API that does very much the same thing. 62 contributed modules, I've got them all listed here. Each one of these will have very specific upgrade instructions, because we, as the people who put it in core, know whether it's just another module that got thrown in the modules directory, or whether it got integrated with system. But people who are upgrading might not know that. So we're currently working on documenting all of that on backdropcms.org, so you can go there and you can type in your module name and it'll tell you what you need to do. Just delete it in Drupal 7, or leave it alone, we'll handle it for you. And then hopefully everyone will get easy as possible upgrades out of it. So looking at the total number of modules we have for Backdrop, right now there are 556 projects in the contributed group, and there are 425 of them that have stable releases. So those are ones that are available directly within Backdrop or on backdropcms.org. So that is good, I think, to me, that we have more than 100 of them that are currently in development. That means that there are a lot of people working on stuff as opposed to the stuff that's already done. So I think we've got kind of an increasing interest in people who are working on contributed modules for coming from Drupal 7. Actually, some of these are new too now. We're getting some people with new ideas, which is exciting. We come to it with the experience of like, in Drupal we did this, but there are people who in Backdrop are like, oh, well now that Backdrop does it differently, I'm going to solve that problem differently, and they create a new solution, and that's really exciting, because I'm like, I never knew someone would think about it that way, but they come up with cool things. So it's great. All right, let's talk a little bit about our community. We have 24,000 people plus that have downloaded Backdrop. Slightly over 2,000 people have created user accounts on backdropcms.org. Live Backdrop sites is just under 1,000. People working on core, 95. People supporting contributed modules, 78. I think that's also an interesting split between like the Drupal community. There's a ton of contributors, but not very many core developers. But because it's so easy to contribute to Backdrop, mostly because of GitHub, we get people who come in and fix something in core long before they write contributed code, which is kind of exciting to see. And then on backdropcms.org, you can also list your agency as being an organization seeking Backdrop work. There's 48 of those. I think that's also notable because many of them are Drupal agencies who've looked at Backdrop and said, oh, our team has those skills, we'll just put out our flag and say we can do that too. Online, you can find us at Backdrop on GitHub. There's a bunch of other resources. We have a live chat, we have a forum, our main website, and you can find us on Twitter, Backdrop CMS. And obviously you can meet people like us at Drupal camps like this one. We tend to attend Drupal camps usually where we are invited, because not all Drupal camps want to have non-Drupal content. Some of them are web camps, and more general, which is nice, but not all Drupal camps, but many. We have mini camps. This year we had our first one in Minneapolis this year, and we're going to have another one in October in Berkeley. So far these have been like a first day event before a Drupal event, so we try and monopolize on the fact that people are still in Drupal 7, learning Drupal 8, maybe also learning Backdrop. But probably end of life of Drupal 7, we'll start having our own standalone, non-mini camps. We have virtual user groups that meet the first Tuesday of every month. Nice guy named Tim from Twin Cities is organizing them. He's open to topics, so if there's something you're super curious about, you could throw him an idea and he might run a meeting on it, which you could attend or watch later. And then speaking of watching videos later, every week we have a live broadcast meeting on sort of how the sausage is made, and it gets posted on YouTube later. So this goes to sort of doing everything in the open. If you want to see how Backdrop is created, you can come to those meetings. Also, every single one of those meetings has a live Q&A session at the end. So if you want to ask a question to a human face, there's usually a bunch of people there who are happy to help answer them. And we're out of time. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and just say thank you, and we'll stop the recording, and then we can do questions like this since this last session. So thank you very much for listening today.